So this is our next lesson on globalization. The last lesson, what we had kind of started looking at was the idea of a company starting to sell to the globe. So instead of targeting just your locality, targeting your local customers, you'll take a company now like Microsoft, Coca-Cola, or something like that, and we're selling to the entire world. One world, one market. And all your basically, your customers are everybody. And there's obviously only a select few companies that operate like that. But it's becoming more and more because obviously even things like Amazon have made it so simple that I can sell something abroad at the click of a button, even if I'm a small company. So there's other websites as well, Etsy and a few others, where you can basically start selling a product that you're producing yourself, and you can more or less sell it to the world. Um, so that kind of becoming a global business has become much more easier, I suppose, in the last 5 years. Um, Reasons why you become a global business, we looked at, obviously, look, you have way more customers you can sell to, which would be kind of the main one, and that's become so much easier now because of improvements in technology. So today I'm going to focus on other elements of how a global business would operate. So a global product is obviously what they're trying to sell. So I'll use the same brand name so that obviously that people know who you are in America versus people know who you are in South Africa and so forth. They'll try to use the same brand name and have the same design all over the world. The product may need to be adjusted to reflect technical, legal, and language. So you'll often find that if there is something like Coca-Cola that's for sale, that obviously the language is going to change on the can depending on the country you're in, but the design and the logo itself, in most cases, will stay the exact same. And if it's something as simple as going to a Subway, the fast food Subway, I'm not talking about a train service, or going to Starbucks or going to McDonald's or something, it's generally always the same kind of the same look, the same design, the packaging is the same. So they try and keep everything the same just so that you're aware of what the company is, and that once you go abroad and you see a McDonald's, you recognize it straight away. And I would say that it's probably it's probably best practice to do that. I mean, I've been abroad several times where we've been looking to eat something, and you'll see one of these McDonald's or something like that that you recognize from home, and you'll generally probably go there if you're just looking for something quick and you're not looking for a sit-down meal. Just purely because you recognize it. Now, there are obviously times, as I said, through language or technical reasons why they mightn't keep the same name. Another one could be legal. If you know of the company TK Maxx, generally kind of I suppose a lower cost kind of general store and clothing store. So TK Maxx is an American company, and in America they're TJ Maxx, but for legal reasons in, I believe, is it Ireland and the UK, or is it Europe? For legal reasons they couldn't use TJ, so they have to call themselves TK Maxx here. If you're ever in America, you'd see the exact same design, but it would be TJ Maxx. So sometimes they have to change for legal reasons. So global price, quite simply, you're going to try to charge a similar price worldwide, because you're aiming at the same kind of customers worldwide. McDonald's have a relatively cheap price, so that if you have €1 or €2, you can go in and you can buy a hamburger, or you can buy small chip or something like that. They're not trying to establish themselves as a restaurant where people will reserve seats and go on a date and spend €80 like you would maybe in a I suppose a traditional restaurant. So they're not trying to go for that kind of market. So their idea is that they're trying to charge a cheap price, so that as much as possible, so that it's kind of an easy way for people just to go in and have a quick meal. So there are changes, depending on the country. If the country is a higher standard of living, you're probably going to charge people more, depending on other things as well, to do with transport costs to get the products into the country, depending on how much delivery will cost, or how the country is in terms of the competition there. I mean, if everybody in the country operating in that sector is selling for a much cheaper price, then you'll have to bring your price down. So generally they'll try and go for the same price. So what I've done here is I've got a graphic here, and I'm focusing on McDonald's, sorry to constantly bring up McDonald's and food in the morning. But the graphic here is basically just showing price of Big Macs. So this is the price of Big Macs in the 6 most expensive areas around the world, and then the 6 cheapest. And all of the prices have been changed to US dollars. So obviously, in all of these countries, apart from the United States, none of these countries actually use US dollars as their currency, but it's just basically been exchanged. The prices is what it would cost in the US. So that would be approximately €6 something, and this would be approximately €1.70. So you can see that or Lebanon is the cheapest, sorry, and their price would probably be about €1.20 if you were to change that to euros. So the cheapest place you can go for a Big Mac in the world is Lebanon, and you'll pay €1.20 approximately, and you'll pay $1.77. Obviously, that's to do with living conditions. You know, the standard of living in Lebanon is much less than what the standard of living would be in Switzerland, where Switzerland would be kind of recognized as being one of the wealthiest places in the world, where individuals there would do quite well for themselves, and they have a load of banking loopholes and everything. So there's billions and billions of any currency pumped into Switzerland every year. So what we're looking at basically is these are the prices, and although McDonald's and whatever products they sell, they try to keep it at a consistent price, there is a big difference. There's a big difference between the more expensive countries here and the cheaper countries. And I don't know how much it costs in Ireland. Is it €2 or €3, €4? I don't know, for a Big Mac. I don't think it's as expensive as it is there in the US. In fact, I think it could be less in Ireland. But it's basically just an idea from 2021 as to what the price would be. So they try to keep a similar price range. They don't want it to be very, very, very expensive. But depending on the country itself, these would be competitive prices in those countries. Global place. So we know obviously about global companies try to keep the same look of a product. Their price tries to be some way similar, but there can be differences. So how do they sell? Well, they could sell directly to the customers or use a distribution agent. So distribution agent would be something like Amazon, or where you're operating on a website where they're selling the product for you to someone else. If I design something and I want to sell it on Etsy, if it's something artsy, if it's creative, if people have heard of that before, a website where I can kind of design a cup, and I can put some kind of logos on the cup, and I can put it up for sale on Etsy, and people around the world can buy it. And Etsy would be a distribution agent, kind of, in a sense. The global businesses rely on local agents and distributors to deliver their businesses. So obviously, if you're talking as simple as even just buying Coca-Cola, buying Coke cans or bottles or whatever, it's not like Coca-Cola have set up shops in each town. They just sell out of, SuperValu, Tesco, your local corner stores, pubs, restaurants. So they have their own ways of distributing their good. They don't set up Coca-Cola shops. Instead, what they do is they set up in local shop areas or with agents or distributors or anything like that. So that's how they sell, and it obviously depends on what you're selling. Some companies will try to create their own store and sell directly from that. Global promotion. So a company will try to use the same advertising all around the world, but this may not be possible because of difference in language and culture. This was, I think, one of the most effective global promotions. I think, I forget how many years ago, that Coca-Cola brought out the name campaign, and all they did was take the top 150 names in that country. So obviously they printed off, depending on, they did this globally, but let's say in Australia they would pick the top 150 names, and they print those onto cans, and then they'd go and sell. and then they did the same in Ireland, they did the same in Canada, they did the same, elsewhere. And that was their global promotion campaign, and it was highly effective. And they obviously had other things as well. They had sister, best friend, love. They had BFF. They had all these other different kind of designs, as well as having, John, Mary, and so forth. So that's a global promotion. They try to keep it more or less the same around the world, but there was differences. Implications of globalization for business. So what does it mean if a business is going to go global? Well, it means they'll have to face more competition, obviously. If I'm trying to sell a product, let's say O'Neill's again, because they're a very popular Irish company. O'Neill's are obviously involved in production of, leisure wear, tracksuits, stuff like that. If they start to try to get into the American market more and get into a more global market, which they don't really focus on too much, they'll face much more competition, and that's obviously a challenge for them. But they have much more opportunities, because obviously there are billions of people around the world that they could potentially sell to. Economies of scale, so we said this before, because they're able to operate mass production, because they're able to produce much more, it's generally cheaper to produce one item. So if they have their factory set up already, and if they're producing t-shirts for 4 hours every day, they already have all the machines in place. They have the materials they need for production for 4 hours, and they make, let's say, 10,000 O'Neill's t-shirts. If they were trying to sell to a global market, they might do that same operation 24 hours a day. The machines are still there. They don't have to pay for new machines. They just have to pay the staff to stay on for the full day. They need to pay staff to have an operation 24/7, and they just need to pay more materials. And then instead of producing 10,000 t-shirts, they're able to produce 60,000 t-shirts or something like that. So economies of scale means generally the more you produce, the cheaper it costs per one item. And a lot of the time it's simply because instead of you using all your machines for 4 hours a day for production, you'll now employ staff to work around the clock. So you'll have people working nights during the day, and you're using the same machines, so you don't have to buy any new machines. You're just paying people to work all the time. Need for quality and innovation. If you're moving abroad, there's obviously difference in styles, let's say, in a product, and you obviously need to be very up to date in being innovative with your products and keeping up with that. You might need to rely on high quality or innovation as alternative ways of competing in global markets. So you need to establish yourself as something different. And successful businesses may be taken over by a larger global company. If you're successful abroad, a company may O'Neill's, let's say, would be successful abroad, and then Adidas would decide to take over O'Neill's, something like that. 2 more slides, 3 more slides. So other implications of selling abroad for the customers this time is generally could be lower prices. The consumers may benefit from lower prices as global producers use economies of scale. So remember what we said is, instead of O'Neill selling to just the Irish market, they can now produce millions and millions of t-shirts, and it'll cost them a slightly cheaper price per product. And that's generally why, if you buy from one of the more established, I suppose, some of these items here that would be produced worldwide, sometimes their price isn't that much more expensive than somebody locally trying to sell something. If somebody locally was trying to create their own shampoo or hand lotion, and you see stuff like that going around, a lot of the time their price might be very similar to an established brand, even though in general obviously the established brand is much more sought after, and they're generally, you'd expect them to be more expensive, but because of the mass production they have, they can bring the price down. And obviously increased choice, because there's more companies selling globally, there's much more choice. So there's 2 more slides to go. What else does it mean for the economy and society if companies go global? Well, there's much more trade. There's a huge volume of trade, because you can basically buy goods from anywhere. You've loads of choice. Increase in employment has led to an increased level of employment. There may have been changes in the type of employment. So for example, obviously Amazon are a global company. They would have started off, I think, in the late 80s, early 90s. And I think it was early 90s, and they have grown to a global company, and they've created employment all around the world. They are soon to move to Ireland. So there's going to be more employment here as well, because they're obviously opening up a um, not a production plant, but I suppose a distributing plant here in Ireland. Increased use of resources, the economic growth and production demands caused by globalization have put a greater strain on scarce resources. So that's more to do with the environment and scarce resources, especially oil being used up, and transport and communications. We've advances in transport, generally due to delivery and communication networks. Last slide. So what else does it mean for the economy and society, for businesses going global? Foreign direct investment, and nowhere is that more visible than Ireland. So a lot of those big companies, Microsoft are in Ireland, Apple are in Ireland, Google are in Ireland. So all of these companies are obviously global companies, and they have directly invested their money. So it's foreign direct investment into Ireland to open up offices here. So it's been a huge part of the economic growth in Ireland. In fact, the biggest employer in Ireland here is Google. They're the biggest contributor, I think, anyway. So these companies have come in and they've basically made Ireland a lot more wealthy because they've invested here. Distribution of wealth, so obviously the money that Apple would have worldwide. In fact, sorry, I think it could be Apple or Google, I think, that are probably the most money invested in Ireland compared to any other company. So distribution of wealth, so obviously these companies are highly successful, and obviously because they're earning so much money and they have plants here in Ireland, there is more wealth coming here. While globalization increased the income level and wealth of many people worldwide, the wealth is not being shared equally, and that's just, I suppose, a case of, well, you could say that the top tier of countries in the world are where most of these companies base themselves, and that's where the money stays. Cultural issues, and I suppose on that too, if you have companies like Amazon that start to take over, and people go to Amazon instead of buying from their small local business, what you'll find is all of the money will go to Amazon. They'll use it in the countries in which they operate. And if you take a country, let's say like Belarus, where people there, let's say, start buying off Amazon more and more, well, all the local distributors in Belarus will obviously be losing out on a lot of money. So there's issues with distribution of wealth and cultural issues. So relies on selling the same products to all consumers, but obviously there's issues there in terms of what that country generally, their lifestyle, and a quick example I'd have there is, I said before, McDonald's is in most of the countries in the world, but they don't have any location in Iceland because they were unsuccessful in Iceland. It's a much more primal lifestyle, and the healthy eating is much more important rather than convenience food. And just McDonald's failed there; they couldn't take off, and Icelandic would have a different lifestyle to other areas of maybe Ireland, UK, or America. So generally, due to cultural issues as well, the company may or may not take off. That is our last lesson on globalization, and I'll put a little bit of homework up in Google Classroom. Thanks for listening.